How's it going, everybody? So in this video we're going to be discussing how I acquired the knowledge that I acquired. Okay, how do I know what I know? And I think this is a very important video to make and a very important discussion to have because I have noticed there are so many people out there who sound very convincing, like especially on YouTube, of their ideas and of the things that they claim, when in reality a lot of things they claim either don't work or are completely dangerous. There's a lot of people that spread dangerous ideas, or they'll share like diets or supplements or something like that, but then the mechanisms that they claim as to how these things work could be completely inaccurate, complete nonsense. Okay, so I'm gonna explain how I acquire my knowledge and how I kind of have gotten to where I am today with everything. Okay, so man, and this is a very complicated topic. There's a lot of moving parts to it. So hopefully this makes sense and I guess is enlightening. Okay, so first of all, what I do is, or what I have done, because remember, there's a lot of different subjects, right? But I think overall, for pretty much everything, whether it's, relationship advice, or, like when I was focusing on that, right? When I was focusing on that, health, reversing diseases like my irritable bowel syndrome that I had at one point, or the psoriasis, the extreme severe psoriasis I had on my skin at one point, or even like panic and anxiety attacks at one point that I had. Basically, if I have some kind of problem in my life, the first thing I started doing, okay, because at first I was all over the place. At first I didn't know where to find good information or how to go about it, and it was a lot of trial and error with a lot of bullshit. But what I eventually started doing, and I realized is the first thing you need to do when you're trying to figure a subject out, you need to look for large groups of people that are doing things that work, okay? Find people, large groups of people that are actually getting the results that you want, okay? Now there's caveats to this, okay? A lot of caveats. Basically, you're looking for, I'm talking groups that look like hundreds of thousands of people who are sharing their anecdotes, okay, that are sharing their experiences, okay? So there's a huge, like, intellectual elitism, I guess we'll call it, or scientific elitism, where people, like, literally completely disregard anecdotes, and they somehow, like, believe that your decisions need to start with scientific evidence. But I actually do the reverse, because I find that it actually provides the results that I'm looking for, and kind of prevents dogmatic thinking, and prevents like intellectual boxes that people put themselves in. Which I still am dogmatic about certain things, right? But anyway, you need to find people who are getting the results that you want. They found what works, okay? That's the first thing. And there's a lot of problems with this, though, so we got to go into that, okay? There's a lot of nuances in all of this, and this is why most people, they might be kind of right about certain things, but they might be off the deep end with other things, right? Or not completely accurate. Because there's all this nuances and intricacies within all this information. So, let's see. Let's give an example. So, for example, my irritable bowel syndrome, okay, this is a really good example. I found communities of people who went raw vegan, and they reversed, or they so-called healed their irritable bowel syndrome, okay? You eating nothing but raw fruits, and basically raw fruits, really, the fruitarian diet, right? And when I did the fruitarian diet, my irritable bowel syndrome went away as well. And my psoriasis also went away. So I thought that was fascinating. And guys, keep in mind, guys and girls, keep in mind, or whatever gender you identify as. At this time, I'm talking 2014-ish is when raw veganism was really big back then. That was the boom of veganism in general. That was when Vegan Gains just began its channel, a little bit later than that, etc., etc. So anyway, there were a lot of people out there that were, noticing when they went on a fruitarian diet, a lot of their diseases were being reversed. And y'all know I follow a mostly meat-based diet now, so we're gonna. So here's the thing. All of these people, they would explain, oh, raw veganism healed me because we're naturally frutivores, okay? So they'd be like, oh, this works, and then they jump to some crazy, far-fetched jump in logic. And they come to a completely, is it the word erroneous? Is that the word? Conclusion? And so, of course, at the time, I was like, yeah, man, I'm a gorilla, and I had a bunch of stuffed monkeys that I, used to hang out with and eat bananas with. And I was owning it up. I was like, yeah, I'm a freaking gorilla, right? That's what humans are, right? Just like that Milton Mills guy says. If you didn't watch my reaction video to that guy, you should definitely watch it. It's hilarious. Anyway, so they're like, yeah, fruitarian diet heals irritable bowel syndrome, it heals cancer, heals psoriasis, heals candida, they would say. It heals all diseases because it's the natural human diet. And of course now looking back at it, it's hilarious to think something like that, considering in most places in the world, fruits are only available during very small periods of time during the year. Outside of the tropics, right? But tropic islands and whatnot, are such small parts of land. It just doesn't make any sense to assume humans are frugivores. And I'm not going to get into that. There's a lot of reasons why we're not frugivores. A lot of reasons that I could say that most people probably didn't really think of. But anyway, so the point is, though, the fruitarian diet did heal my irritable bowel syndrome. It did heal my psoriasis, and there were a lot of other people out there that I was seeing in these Reddit groups and Facebook groups and forums. At the time, actually, there wasn't even Reddit. It was actually forums that were really big. That 30 Bananas a Day was Freely the Banana Girls forum that I was kind of briefly looking through. Anyway, here's the thing, though. Just because something actually works, okay, just because the raw fruit diet healed my condition, it doesn't mean that, number one, that's the only way to heal that condition, and it doesn't mean that there's something magical about the fruit diet per se, okay? And this could be said the same thing for carnivore diets. Carnivore diets heal a wide variety of issues for people. But there's a lot of people out there that they'll jump to conclusions and logic, and they'll say the reason why the carnivore diet heals this is because meat is the most nourishing food. Meat is magic. Meat heals. I have a shirt that says that. Meat heals. And it's something special about the meat. Or they will say that plants are toxic, like human beings should not be eating plants, and plants are toxic, okay? Garlic kills brain cells, Farage said, right? And don't even get me started on Frank Tufano, right? And so, there are some truths behind that to an extent, but not plants are poisonous, period. But certain plants have chemicals that could be dangerous for some people with certain conditions, right? But plants are not deadly, per se, in general, overall. They're not poisonous, okay? And there's nothing magic about meat per se. Now, of course, there is magic to meat, but that's not the reason why people heal, right? Because I literally completely resolved my psoriasis and my irritable bowel syndrome on a raw vegan diet, but also on a completely meat-based diet, okay? So here's the thing, though. Okay, here's the thing. So we see what works based on anecdotes, okay? And I'm talking a large amount of anecdotes. I'm not just saying, there's like a handful of people on a forum somewhere or on a Reddit group or on YouTube, a handful of people who say that, this supplement raised their testosterone or something. I'm talking an overwhelming amount of people, like real people. There's interviews on YouTube. There's Facebook groups of actual grandmas and aunts and uncles of just regular people who are completely shocked that they're resolving their diseases in these communities, okay? So that's where I start, is finding a shit ton of people who have success with something. And the same thing can be said about herbs or supplements, okay? A good example is like ashwagandha, okay? So I see a lot of reports of people that say ashwagandha, gave them, basically numbed their emotions, numbed their pleasure response, etc., right? Of course, you see a lot of people that say ashwagandha changed their life for the better, and I have some close friends that use it still to this day with no negative side effects that they have to report. So but that's another example. There's an overwhelming amount of people, like maybe 60% of people, I guess, who report negative side effects of ashwagandha in some of these Facebook groups and like the Repeat forum. Don't even get me started on that. Okay, so those are anecdotes, though. Those are groups of people, okay? So I think when you find what is working for people, that is the beginning, okay? And I'm going to get to the caveats and how to kind of take, etc. Some of the notes we got to talk about, some of the how to fact check it or whatever. I'm going to get to that. But man, I don't know what happened. Damn it, I lost my train of thought. Okay, well, let's just get to how to fact check it or whatever, and that thought will come back. Okay, so here's the thing. Oh yeah, well, I was gonna say most people they start with scientific evidence. They start with giant meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials that use complicated mathematics in order to combine the studies together and see the ultimate results of all the studies together. And I have had a client for the last year who has a PhD in data analysis. So she does meta-analysis literally for fun. She literally did a freaking some kind of meta-analysis on it was a crossover study to find out on their movies, on family movie night or something like that, to see if her dad was biased towards some particular actor or something like that. Anyway, so I regularly have doctors as clients in personal training in particular, and so anyway, me and this doctor of data analysis, PhD, we regularly would talk about, in health sciences specifically, you need to consider the individual studies that are taken into account. And most people just assume that these meta-analysis automatically kind of account for these confounding variables and errors and things. But a lot of people, especially in the science field, they don't realize how many hundreds of different variables can significantly impact your results of individual studies, first of all. But then when you combine all of those studies together, you're combining the amount of confounding variables and muddying the waters of your results even further. Because you're no longer just looking at an intervention trial, for example, that doesn't account for salt intake or something, right? Now you're combining all sorts of studies that might not have accounted for the salt intake in one, might not have accounted for smoking in the other, might not have accounted for the vast amount of relationship stress the person have gone through, whatever, and then got some result on chocolate causes heart disease or something. It's anyway, the point that I'm trying to make though is a lot of people use these studies to guide their health decisions, okay? They're like, well, you see, people who eat the most fruits and vegetables and the least red meat tend to have the lowest rates of diseases in the population, right? But then we've talked about like healthy user bias and also how insignificant typically the statistical significance of these results actually are. And basically what that means is like the absolute risk reduction of like a certain eating pattern, for example, is typically not that high. The magnitude of effect of most interventions that are studied in these like nutrition sciences are not that significant, okay? The results are not that impressive. I've kind of made videos about that on like polyphenols, for example. If you're interested in a more deeper discussion on that, go back and watch. But the point that I'm trying to make is like these studies are not the best for a starting point, but everyone uses these studies as like a starting point to make guidelines. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that we're clinicians, we're doctors, we are health professionals or fitness professionals, we are, politicians or whatever that need to make massive guidelines for the wide range of the population, okay, that needs to be generalized and standardized to meet a large variety of different people's needs, okay? That's, the people don't understand, like, why the freaking food pyramid is the way it is, okay? It's I mean, yeah, it's influenced by industry, of course, but it's also, like, recommended daily intake of nutrients and all these things that, I tell people is not important if you're eating whole foods, etc. But generally speaking, unless you have like a diagnosed deficiency syndrome, most Americans that these guidelines are actually created for are eating a freaking refined food diet. So, and most of the vitamins and minerals they're getting are from like fortified foods. So we have to have guidelines in place to kind of give stiff guidelines. We have to give stiff guidelines. And so we can't just use anecdotes and like these thousands of people or whatever that are healing their diseases in these like health communities, okay? So anyway, here's the thing. I start with what works and anecdotes on large amounts of people, literally population studies, basically. And of course, you verify that these people are real. Then you take studies. In particular, you read physiology books, you read books on nutrition science, read mechanisms of action, so mechanistic studies, mechanistic science, and look at intervention trials, look at population studies, and you have to understand how to interpret these studies, so it can be really challenging. But you take the anecdotes first as a starting place, the huge groups of people that are doing what works, okay? Then you look at the studies, and you look at, well, why is this working, okay? So going back to like the raw vegan diet and the carnivore diet and how I healed my disease on both those diets. Here's the thing. When I was raw vegan for a couple months. Then I went on the starch solution diet. What's his name? What's the starch solution name guy? I forgot it. He's like a vegan doctor. Not Campbell. Some other cereal guy. Whatever. John McDougall. That's the guy's name. Damn it. So I went on his damn starch solution diet, and next thing you know, I was shitting out all this brown rice and like undigested grains. Irritable bowel syndrome was there, and I had psoriasis again, okay? And don't even get me started on the amount of money I wasted using probiotics, okay? Lots and lots of charlatans. So I'm going to get to that here in a bit. Probiotics and enzymes and shit didn't help, okay? Freaking candida cleanses and nonsense definitely didn't help. I'll tell you what helped though. Removing the foods that I was having problems with. And most people when they're first starting, it can be really, really challenging to narrow the foods down. But I went on an elimination diet, basically. I actually went paleo is what I really did. And I went on like just a basic paleo diet, Lauren Cordain style. I just ate meat, I ate eggs, I ate cruciferous vegetables cooked, and I ate like bananas and fruits. And then I added some like raw spinach and stuff, but I had noticed I kind of saw that in the toilet as well. But it wasn't as bad. I wasn't having like the horrible bloating and stomach problems and digestive issues when I ate like raw spinach and whatnot. But yeah, the paleo diet completely removed all my symptoms though. I didn't have any like digestive discomfort or anything. If I ate the raw vegetables, maybe like I'd have some, I'd just see them on the other end, but it wouldn't be that bad. But when I ate the whole grains, the beans, the nuts, and seeds, I had just like irritable bowel syndrome and psoriasis all over. It was terrible. So what I'm getting at here is like, okay, clearly it was the grains, the beans, the nuts, and seeds that were mostly at fault for triggering my symptoms. Okay. The raw vegan diet wasn't magic. The carnivore diet isn't magic. The freaking paleo diet wasn't magic. They all cured my symptoms, per se, removed my symptoms, but it wasn't the diet that did it, per se. It wasn't like a magical properties of, like the banana diet. Like, it's not like, oh, humans were meant to eat this diet. Or like, oh, meat is magic. No, it was, I found the freaking trigger, or what people call a cause, but it's the trigger. I found the trigger, and I removed the freaking trigger, okay? And voila, there goes my problem. So whether I ate just like the raw vegan diet, or I ate the carnivore diet or the paleo diet, as long as I removed those trigger foods, those beans, nuts, and seeds, and whole grains, I was okay. And a little caveat, I think that's why the carnivore diet works so well for autoimmune illness. It does a similar thing that the autoimmune paleo diet was trying to solve, only even more. It takes it to a higher extreme. Not to say, it is true that's one of the most nourishing kind of foods, red meat in my opinion. Lots of other things to talk about in that regard. But, so yeah, I found what works, and then in my experience through trial and error, but I used these communities of people. Right? I saw all these people healing on that paleo diet, right? All right. So anyway, then what you got to do is then what I started doing is I started to look at the mechanisms of actions and things. And basically what you find is, at least for psoriasis, when somebody consumes foods that they're like allergic to, or foods that they can't digest, actually. Foods that they can't digest for whatever reason. So basically there's like a hard cellulose type shell outside of a lot of plants, but especially beans, nuts, and seeds and legumes. So you can think of it as cellulose, but I don't think it's cellulose, it's something else. But there's a hard shell on the outside. And for me, at least, no matter how much I cooked it, that shell remained. And kind of like potato skins and tomato skins, a lot of people don't digest it. Or think about corn. You know how when you eat corn, like you poop out like the corn shell or whatever? So that was kind of what was going on with me. And basically it just completely bypasses digestion for some people. And the modern health, system, like if I looked online all over the place, I looked at WebMD and some of these other authorities, and they would just say, oh, these are high in fiber, and so nothing to worry about. It's just fiber. And I'm thinking to myself, bro, I'm pooping out like whole beans and stuff, and you're telling me it's because it's fiber? They're like, yeah, it's normal with foods like beans. And I'm like, why even eat them if you're just pooping them out, right? Obviously, then I realized, well, they're all actually technically seeds, and nature doesn't really want you to eat seeds, but that's kind of like a stupid argument considering beans are a staple food in most cultures, right? Anyway, but I found that it has to do with this outer layer, and for whatever reason, my digestive system was not digesting it. And I think it could have been like maybe a pathogen in my intestine that was causing it. It could have been, that was causing me to not be able to digest those foods. It could have been just I was eating too much as a vegan, right? Or Mediterranean before that, Mediterranean diet. But basically, maybe if you work your way up with small increments and you cook it really well, over time your digestive capacity will improve and you can digest it. But it wasn't worth it for me, especially considering there's no essential nutrient that you really need from these foods, so I just completely removed it. Anyway, so looking at mechanistic data, looking at, well, why is it the way it is? And, you basically just look at the structure of the plant and you realize, that was probably the issue there, right? Anyway, so a lot of people will take it further and they'll look at the gut microbiome science, and which is really in its infancy, unfortunately. And, then you find out that, like, the human intestine, basically your stomach acid does not digest plant foods in the stomach, okay? Your body actually does most of the digestion of plant foods in the intestine, okay? Of course, you have amylase enzymes in the saliva that typically will break down things like the white, the fleshy part of the potatoes, for example. They'll break down starch, amylase. But the thing is, when you're consuming whole grains, your amylase is only going to digest the fleshy part of the grain. Like, for example, if you eat beans, there is a fleshy part in there. But a lot of that, for me, no matter how much I chewed, is going to go through the stomach completely undigested. A lot of people don't realize that. And that's going to be fermented in the intestine. So this is where we're getting into physiology. You'll know this if you take, like, for example, my National Academy of Sports Medicine certification, if you all can see it on the wall. It had a whole section on how digestion happens. And so you can use physiology, science, and mechanistic data to figure out how the human digestive system works, so you can kind of get a better understanding of why is it when I eat a meat-based diet or a fruit-based diet, I get the result I get, and so many other people. And so what you'll find is, like, bananas, for example, are mostly digested by the amylase, because all you're eating is, like, the fleshy part of the fruit. Those carbohydrates and fibers are a lot easier to break down. Same thing with, like, cooked cruciferous, right? But of course, raw spinach is almost pure cellulose. Brown rice is very hard to kind of like break down at first, because it's a lot of the starch, at least, and a lot of these whole grains and stuff are attached to the indigestible kind of like shell. Basically, it's bound to it. So anyway, most of these plant foods are mostly digested by bacteria in the intestine. Okay, and we know this because of what happens when people remove the stomach, and they kind of like put an artificial stomach on people who have like severe like stomach problems or whatever. And what you see is basically the patient can see the foods and stuff that they're eating and digesting go through a tube or whatever. What you'll see is meat is completely turned to mush after it hits the digestive fluids, after it hits the stomach. The stomach acid and pepsin completely breaks down meat and proteins in general. Even like whole animal proteins, so larger peptides of animal proteins, completely turn to mush in the stomach, okay? Before it even hits the intestine. Completely different pathway of digestion for animal foods. Fruit is mostly broken down in the mouth, like by the saliva. And then, of course, whole grains, beans, nuts, and seeds, these are mostly undigested up until they hit the gut bacteria, okay? So if you guys can get where I'm going with this is me when I discovered the mechanistic data, read a damn textbook. Now I have a pretty decent understanding of why is it that I could eat just like the fruitarian diet and I didn't have irritable bowel syndrome and I didn't have psoriasis. because I wasn't eating the beans, nuts, and seeds. Well, and I can digest the fruits because they're digested by the mouth, right? Just like by the amylase. Then why could I eat the meat diet, right? Well, because meat's mostly digested by stomach acid and pepsin in the stomach. And I also found that I could eat jasmine rice, like white rice, just fine. White rice was perfectly fine. A lot of people who do the carnivore diet to heal their autoimmune illness, they find white rice isn't a trigger food either. So where this leads me to is I use the anecdotes, the communities of people, to see what works for this disease. And this applies to everything, by the way. It's just my kind of like how I kind of first stumbled upon it, and now I use this method for everything. Finding what works with these large communities of people, and then reading, understanding the physiology and the mechanisms of action behind why it works for these people. And the thing is, a lot of people, they will listen to gurus as to how things work, right? Like freaking Dr. Berg. Dr. Berg will be like, vegetables are very important because they change the alkaline balance of the body and your blood acid pH and blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, Dr. Berg, he is a freaking charlatan, and you will know that if you read textbooks and science on the pH balance in the body, okay? So it's very important not to go to charlatans to go to gurus and authority figures for your information. Authority opinion of all kinds, whether it's Frank Tufano, whether it's me, whether it's Dr. Berg, whether it's Dr. Sebi is another one. He's like, the reason why the fruit diet works is because the body's alkaline, blah, blah, blah. And it's like meat rots in your intestine. That's why you had irritable bowel syndrome, and the raw food diet healed it. It's like, that's not based in physiology. But reading a physiology textbook and taking a really good nutrition course, because a lot of nutrition courses don't cover that. And now I'm like, well, fuck, I know how digestion works. And now it makes sense. It's like, well, the beans, nuts, and seeds are just completely undigested by the stomach. So there must be some kind of issue in my intestine. So I kind of came to this kind of suspicion that it was small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or it was candida, or it was just a lack of the bacteria needed to digest it. And that's probably most likely what it is. It's probably just I went right straight into this like plant-based diet shit back in like 2013, 2014. And I had been on a pretty harsh round of antibiotics like in 2011, 2012. And basically, for whatever reason, I didn't have the bacterial capacity in my intestine to break down these foods. Knowing that came from the textbooks, right? But I never would have even embarked on that protocol to figure it out if it wasn't for finding what works in these groups of people, okay? So, there are deeper things that we have to kind of consider, and deeper kind of like more things that I think about and that I look to figure out what I know. And it all depends on the subject, right? But for health advice, like health information, this is just the beginning. But the primary processes that I go through to figure things out, okay, is the what works, with large groups of people. And then I look at textbooks. I read textbooks, or I sift it through the knowledge I've already gained from textbooks, my knowledge on physiology or whatever it is. And then I combine them, and I try to look for holes in people's arguments and things based on the science and the mechanisms, okay? Now, there's a couple things you have to consider, okay? No matter what your method is, you have to always consider the possibility that you might be wrong or that you might be missing information. And this is very, very key, okay? But at the same time, it's also important not to just be like super floaty and like and too ambiguous with things, right? Like a lot of people are way too ambiguous. Usually people who don't understand how science works, they're like, so there's two sides. There's like, the science is solid. The science is proven. Fiber is good for you or good for your gut, right? And those people don't understand science clearly because when health science, nothing is proven. In health science, it's technically a soft science. Nothing is completely solid or completely proven. Some things are pretty convincing and very compelling, and there's a lot of weight of evidence on it. But even then, there's holes to poke through, and there's possible confounding factors to consider. But then there's another side of people who don't understand science, and they're just like, yeah, like science, it's, everything's subjective, man, and you just got to find what works for your body, okay? And that is in no way, shape, or form what I'm trying to get at, because there are some very clear foundational principles that most human beings should probably follow and use as like a kind of like a blueprint and then build off of. Because we're all very, very similar. We're all technically the same species, I think, right? Maybe we're not, right? Woo, right? Different breed of aliens or something, right? I don't know. Maybe some of us were transcended from aliens and didn't breed with monkeys. I don't know. Whatever weird theories y'all might have on how humans were created. But I think we're all the same species. And because of this, we all have certain principles we might want to follow. And so some of those principles that I believe probably are universal are things like there's an optimal protein intake for most people based on your ideal body weight, okay? I think that probably holds true, and I've tested that with lots of clients over the last 10 years, and I think the science is pretty compelling in that regard, okay? That's the first thing. The second thing is obviously we need food, and we need a certain minimum calorie intake to sustain life. And the third thing is that we definitely need essential nutrients. And how much of these things and, yada, yada, the sources we get them from, sure, those are all debatable, right? I think there's a couple other things, but I think those are the most, the main ones, right? The main universal principles. And from there, everything else is pretty kind of moving parts to it, and it's debatable, right? So to summarize, start with what works for a larger group of people, okay? And look for and understand that there's probably other communities of people that are having the same results with a completely different protocol. Then you look at science and textbooks and mechanistic data, and also use intervention trials and population studies, okay? And based on mixing all these things, try to figure out, well, what's actually going on in the population studies, right? Just because a population study says, oh, more fruits and vegetables and less red meat equals better health, it doesn't mean that that's actually what's causing the better health, okay? Similar to like, oh, just because the banana diet heals a certain disease doesn't mean the bananas are magic. It might be a confounding variable. Same thing with the freaking carnivore diet, okay? You have to understand that in intervention trials and in science, a lot of times they'll come to a conclusion, but it might not actually be what they think brought them that conclusion that did, right? Like a freaking study on the Atkins diet might have shown great results. Like, oh, carb restriction seems to have superior results for blood sugar control. But at the same time, maybe these people in the study lowered their calories spontaneously, which is why that has to be equated for, and so is protein intake. So anyway, yeah. I'm going all over the place, but yeah. Find out what works on large groups of people based on actual communities of people that have like reverse disease. We're talking significant, not just, oh, it kind of helped or whatever, or a study that shows, oh, a statistical significant benefit. No, we need clinical significance, not statistical significance. Huge difference. And then you use studies to figure out why did it work, what's the possible mechanisms at play, and completely avoid believing in gurus, even myself. Don't believe what people tell you. Especially if they're telling you hard and fast rules, okay? We're trying to be detectives here and ask questions and uncover evidence. We're not trying to just listen to one person who's like, motherfucker, protein will kill you. You know, like, generally speaking, the more uncertain someone is while still kind of providing information, the more accurate a lot of times they are. And typically the reason why is because science is uncertain. Okay, like if you listen to what I'm saying, I'm like, yeah, it's kind of this, it's kind of that, but we're not conclusive, it's pretty nuanced. That is because we're looking at a wide variety of different data sets and different forms of data, and we're trying to look for what's most likely happening within it all, right? Yeah, so beyond that, you get the what works, and you look at why it works based on science. Look at intervention trials. Try to find intervention trials that also have similar results with similar protocols, right? Like I can show quite a few intervention trials that show a pretty good benefit from Atkins or from like a meat-based diet, right? For example, the A to Z weight loss study. If you look at the actual full paper, not just the abstract, you'll find a lot of the disease markers that the improvements in health that happen in carnivore communities. You also see in this diet, in this intervention trial, and it actually compared it to like vegan diets and stuff. But you also see like caloric restriction tends to like reverse diabetes and stuff too, right? And so just by malnourishing yourself with like a freaking raw vegan diet, or even worse, like a starch-based diet where you're hardly digesting a lot of the calories you're consuming, probably, right? This is just my own dogmatic take on it, by the way. It's not a fact. You might be restricting calories if you're eating a whole food diet. So it's like, is a vegan diet that reversed your diabetes, is that shit magic? Or is it the fact that you're eating a whole food diet and you cut out all the junk, right? Or you're on a carnivore diet. Is it because you remove carbs? Is it because you're just eating meat? Is meat magic? Or is it because you restricted calories? Or is it because you remove food triggers, right? So yeah, but there's a lot more to all this. Hopefully after I eat my first meal of the day, crazy enough, maybe then I will come up with more stuff. So I don't know what I'm going to title this video. I don't think I'm feeling too comfortable just saying this is how I fucking, figure all this shit out. Because in reality, maybe a lot of people have picked up on it, but since I started this journey in like 2012 of like really trying to figure out the truth beyond everything, it has been a very long-winded, complicated process of trial and error and just being a complete idiot. I followed the most idiotic protocols and nutrition circles and you name it, man. I tried every fucking diet. So a lot of this is definitely trial and error. I tried like so many different herbs and supplements. I've studied a lot of them pretty extensively at the very least. You could take me into a health food store and ask me a question about pretty much anything, and I'll at the very least have a general idea of what it's used for, some of the side effects you might get from it, etc. I could write a whole like fucking essay about like probably at least 65, probably more like 75% of the herbs and supplements and foods that you might find at a health food store. Literally. Walk into Sprouts or Whole Foods or whatever. And going to the grocery store with me is one hell of an experience, okay? You can ask any girl who has dated me and gone grocery shopping with me. At least when I'm in the mood to be such a way. A lot of times I'm trying to have fun and trying to joke around a lot, right? Because I can be a bit too like brainy a lot of the time, right? So I try to be more joking and what's the word? I like to be a dumbass. I prefer to have fun and be a fucking dumbass when I'm out with friends and girls and whatever. Anyway, yeah. So, maybe I'll make a more simple fucking damn it, a simple video of this where I actually have like an outline and try and make it 10 minutes long. All right, my food's probably ready. I'm going to go take it off the burner so it doesn't burn and try to eat it. And I will talk to y'all very, very soon.